years before the Shah lost his throne, before Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile, before Lebanon became a battlefield, and before the world's superpowers turned the Middle East into their next arena. A quiet chain of decisions had already begun changing the region forever. This is the story of those decisions. In the late 1960s, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and Saudi Arabia was ruled by King Faisal. Despite what many people assume today, these two countries weren't enemies. They were actually close allies, so close that one day the Shah sent King Faisal an unusual message. He told him, Saudi Arabia needs to modernize, open cinema, give women more rights, create jobs, introduce land reforms, open your society before it's too late. To the Shah, this wasn't just reform, it was survival. He genuinely believed that if Middle Eastern countries didn't modernize, they would eventually collapse from within. But King Faisal completely disagreed and said, your people are deeply religious. If you force secular reforms too quickly, your own people will eventually turn against you. At the time, the Shah dismissed the warning, but the history didn't. Now, why this conversation between King Faisal and Shah matters? Because almost every conflict we see in today's Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Iraq, can be traced back to one question. Can a deeply religious society be transformed from the top down? Or will that transformation create the very revolution it's trying to prevent? That question would soon reshape the entire region. The Shah decided to find out. In 1963, he brought the reform. Education expanded. Women gained the right to vote. Ironically, one of the Shah's most progressive reform became one of the reasons conservative clerics united against him. The government pushed Iran toward rapid modernization. On paper, it looked like exactly the future the Shah wanted. But there was one problem. The same reforms that won admiration abroad were quietly creating powerful enemies at home. Religious leaders opposed them. Left-wing revolutionaries opposed them. Even many ordinary Iranians began asking a dangerous question. Who was this revolution really for? And that is where our story truly begins. So, the Shah had made his decision. If Iran wanted to survive the future, it couldn't remain trapped in the past. In 1963, he launched what became known as the White Revolution, despite its name. It wasn't a revolution carried out by ordinary people. It was a revolution designed by the state itself. The Shah wanted to rebuild Iran from the top down. The reforms were ambitious. Large landholdings were broken apart. Millions of acres were redistributed to farmers. New schools were built across the country. Literacy programs reached villages that had never seen formal education. Women received the right to vote and gained greater access to education and public life. Factories expanded. Roads were built. Industries grew. To many observers in the West, Iran looked like a country racing toward modernity, and Washington loved what it was seeing. Remember, this wasn't happening in isolation. The world was already divided into two camps. On one side stood the United States. On the other, the Soviet Union. Every country mattered, especially countries sitting on oil, especially countries sitting between Europe and Asia, and Iran happened to be both. For Washington, losing Iran wasn't an option, not after what had happened elsewhere during the Cold War. Across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, new governments were emerging. Some aligned themselves with Moscow. Others chose Washington. Every revolution suddenly became more than a local event. It became another move in a global chess match. Iran was no exception. The Shah understood this. American policymakers understood it. And the Soviet Union certainly understood it. The Shah believed modernization would make Iran stronger. Economically, it did. Infrastructure improved. Universities expanded. The country's economy grew rapidly during much of the 1960s and early 1970s. Yet political stability wasn't growing at the same speed. In fact, another kind of opposition was quietly taking shape. Not one opposition, several. Religious scholars believed the reforms were weakening Islam's traditional role in society. Large landowners resented losing their influence. Many left-wing students argued that modernization wasn't benefiting ordinary Iranians equally. Nationalists accused the Shah of becoming too dependent on American support. Different groups, different ideology, different goal, but they all shared one conclusion. The Shah's vision of Iran was becoming increasingly difficult to accept, and the Shah's response wasn't dialogue. It was control. Criticism became more dangerous. Political opposition faced increasing pressure. The state relied heavily on its security apparatus to suppress dissent. For a while, that approach appeared to work. The streets looked calm. The economy looked strong. Iran looked stable. But beneath that image, anger was growing. And within that growing opposition, a few voices would soon begin changing the direction of the entire Middle East. By the mid-1970s, something unusual was happening inside Iran. The Shah had expected resistance. What he didn't expect was that completely different groups would slowly begin standing against him at the same time. And that's what made this moment so dangerous, because they all wanted the Shah gone, but none of them agreed on what should come next. The first camp was led by Ayatollah Khomeini. For him, the White Revolution wasn't progress. It was Iran slowly losing its Islamic identity. He believed the monarchy had crossed a line and that no amount of economic growth could replace religious value. From exile, his speeches, messages, and ideas continued finding their way back into Iran. The Shah had forced the man out of the country. He hadn't removed his influence. The second camp looked completely different. These weren't traditional clerics. Many were university students, left-wing intellectual, and young revolutionary. They believed something else entirely. Yes, Iran was becoming richer, but richer for whom? Oil money was flowing into the country, yet many ordinary Iranians believed corruption was growing just as fast. To them, the problem wasn't that Iran was becoming modern. The problem was who was benefiting from that modernization. One of the most influential voices in this movement was Ali Shariati. He tried to combine revolutionary ideas with Shia political thought. His message attracted thousands of educated young Iranians searching for a different future. So now, the Shah faced two very different opponents. One wanted an Islamic revolution. The other dreamed of a revolutionary social order inspired by anti-imperialist and socialist ideas. Different ideology, different vision, but for the moment, they had found a common enemy, the Shah. Most rulers can survive one opposition. Very few survive several at the same time. And just when it looked like Iran had already split into two competing futures, history introduced a third. His name was Imam Musa al-Sadr. Unlike Khomeini, he wasn't calling for an immediate Islamic revolution. Unlike the left, he wasn't trying to build a communist state. His focus was different. He wanted something many people had almost stopped talking about: the political awakening of Shia communities across the Middle East. When Musa al-Sadr arrived in Lebanon, he found one of the region's poorest and most neglected Shia populations. Instead of leaving, he stayed. He built charities, schools, social institutions, and gradually a political movement. But notice something important. His struggle wasn't really against the Shah. Not yet. He believed Iran, as the largest Shia majority country, should become a protector of Shia communities beyond its border. That single idea would eventually reshape not only Lebanon, but the balance of power across the entire Middle East. So, by the late 1970s, Iran wasn't facing one opposition. It was facing three completely different futures. Khomeini wanted an Islamic state. Ali Shariati imagined a revolutionary Iran built on social justice and political transformation. Musa al-Sadr wanted to unite and politically empower Shia communities without first overthrowing the monarchy. Three men, three visions, one country, and history was about to decide which vision would survive first. Three men, three different visions, three different futures for Iran. If the story had ended there, history might have taken a completely different path. But history rarely respects borders. While Iran was struggling over its future, another crisis was quietly unfolding just a few hundred kilometers away. And, before long, those two stories would become one. That place was Lebanon. During the following years, Lebanon had become home to hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees. Many had fled after losing their homes during the Arab-Israeli conflict. Most believed they would return within weeks. Some even locked their houses, carried the keys with them, and left, believing the exile would be temporary. It wasn't. Weeks became years. Years became decades. Life inside the refugee camp became increasingly desperate. As hope of returning faded, another idea began to grow. If diplomacy wasn't bringing Palestine back, perhaps armed struggle would. Young Palestinians started receiving guerrilla training. Weapons moved across borders. Training camps appeared in southern Lebanon, and Beirut slowly transformed into something few cities had ever become. Not just a capital, but a meeting point for revolutionaries, smugglers, intelligence agencies, and armed movements from across the world. If someone wanted weapons, training, or contacts, Beirut was often the place to find them. This wasn't simply Lebanon's problem anymore. Israel watched the border with growing concern. Palestinian fighters launched cross-border attacks. Israel responded with military operations inside Lebanon. Every raid created new anger. Every retaliation created new recruits. The cycle continued. And while headlines focused on the fighting, another political change was taking place almost unnoticed. Lebanon wasn't one society. It was several communities living inside one fragile state. Christians looked toward France. Many Sunni political groups found support from Egypt and other Arab governments. But Lebanon's Shia population found itself in a different position. They were among the country's poorest communities, and unlike others, they had no powerful regional protector willing to consistently champion their cause. That vacuum mattered, because in geopolitics, vacuums rarely remain empty for long. This was the environment in which Imam Musa al-Sadr's influence continued to grow. His message wasn't built around overthrowing government. It was about dignity, representation, political organization. He believed Shia communities had spent too long living on the margins of Middle Eastern politics. Now, they needed a voice. But events unfolding around around him would soon carry that movement far beyond Lebanon. At the same time, another man was living hundreds of kilometers away in exile, Ayatollah Khomeini. Far from Tehran, he appeared politically isolated, yet the growing unrest across the region was slowly changing. Lebanese Shia leaders traveled to meet him. Palestinian figures also began establishing contact. One by one, regional movements that had once looked in different directions were beginning to notice the same man, not because he held power, but because power itself was beginning to shift. Without realizing it, the Middle East had become one interconnected chessboard. A decision made in Tehran could echo through Beirut. A battle fought near Israel's border could reshape politics inside Iran, and every major capital, Washington, Moscow, Riyadh, Tel Aviv, was now watching the same board, waiting for the next move. What none of them realized was that the next move wouldn't come from a government. It would come from history itself. So by 1978, the Middle East was no longer moving toward one future. It was moving toward three. The Shah still controlled the government. Ayatollah Khomeini had become the symbol of religious resistance. Ali Shariati's ideas had inspired an entire generation of young revolutionaries. And in Lebanon, Imam Musa al-Sadr had awakened a community that had spent decades on the political margin. None of these men wanted exactly the same Middle East. Their destinations were different. Their methods were different. Even their dreams were different. History has a strange habit. Sometimes people walking on completely different roads end up arriving at the same battlefield. And that's exactly what was about to happen. By the end of the 1970s, Iran wasn't simply facing an economic crisis or a political crisis. It was facing something much more dangerous, a crisis of legitimacy. Millions of people had stopped asking, can the Shah modernize Iran? They had begun asking, should the Shah rule Iran at all? The moment a nation starts asking that question, history usually moves very quickly. Outside Iran, Washington was watching. Moscow was watching. Riyadh was watching. Tel Aviv was watching. Beirut was already changing. Nobody could afford to ignore what happened next, because everyone understood one thing. If Iran changed, the balance of power across the Middle East would change with it. But then something happened that nobody predicted. Not Washington, not Moscow, not the Shah, not even the men leading the opposition. A single disappearance would change the calculations of every player on the board. Half a century later, historians still debate what really happened. And once that mystery unfolded, there was no turning back. The revolution was no longer a possibility. It had become a countdown. Every great rivalry begins long before the first battle. The same is true in geopolitics. Wars don't begin when the first shot is fired. They begin when ideas find people willing to fight for them. And by 1978, those ideas had already escaped the pages of books, the halls of mosques, and the classrooms of universities. They were now moving through the streets, quietly, patiently, irreversibly. Because in the game of geopolitics, the move that changes history is almost never the one the world is watching. It's the one everyone fails to notice until the board has already changed. And in the next chapter, one missing man, one growing revolution, and one collapsing monarchy will force the Middle East into a conflict that still hasn't ended.